Have you ever noticed how the clouds drift across the sky, sometimes heavy with storms, sometimes glowing with sunlight, but no matter what shape they take, they always pass. And yet, above them, the sky never disappears. It is always there, vast and unbroken, no matter what moves across its face. Tonight, I want to share with you a story about a monk, a boy who grew into a man, and a truth so simple yet so deep that it can carry you through grief, through longing, through restless nights. It is the story of clouds and sky. It is the story of how life keeps changing, but something greater always remains. This is not a lecture, not a sermon. Just a gentle story told slowly, like sitting under an apricot tree while the breeze carries petals through the air. Let this story hold you the way the mountain holds its monastery. Let the words settle softly, like clouds drifting overhead. And before we begin, I'd like to ask you something. Last night, how many hours did you sleep? Share it with me down in the comments. I'm always curious. Because here, in this little corner we've built together, sleep is not just about numbers, it's about peace. So close your eyes if you wish, let your breath slow, and let me tell you this story. Clouds come and go, the sky remains. The monastery sat on the shoulder of a mountain where the stones were worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Morning always came slowly there, not with noise or rush, but with the pale light, spreading across the valley and touching the old wooden eaves of the temple buildings. The air was clean, almost too clean, carrying the thin smell of pine and earth after a night's rest. The monks rose early, moving with the kind of quiet that came not from effort, but from habit, like the mountain itself had taught them silence. Among them was a young monk named Liang. He was not the youngest, yet he carried himself as though he was still trying to find where he belonged. His robes often slipped loose from his shoulders. His thoughts drifted when he was meant to recite verses, and though his heart was sincere, he struggled to steady it. Liang had come to the monastery years earlier, brought by his uncle after the boy's parents passed away in a sickness that swept through their village. He remembered little of those days except the sound of coughing, the way the lamps burned low, and the feeling of being left behind. The monks gave him food and a roof, and he grew among them, but he never quite felt he had grown into them. He admired their calm, but carried within himself a storm. Sometimes, late at night, while the others slept, Liang would walk to the outer wall and stare down into the dark valley, where the faint glow of distant villages flickered. He wondered what life would have been if he had stayed among ordinary people, if he had worked the fields, or married, or simply grown old in the same place where he was born. Yet each time he thought of leaving, something in him held back. Perhaps it was fear, perhaps it was the feeling that he still had something to learn. The abbot, an elderly monk named Shen, saw this restlessness in Liang. He said nothing at first, preferring to let the boy wrestle with his own heart. But when the pattern continued, when Liang's attention wandered during scripture readings, when his steps quickened as though always eager to be somewhere else, the abbot knew he must guide him, not with heavy words, but with experience. Shen was a man of few instructions, and when he did speak, it was usually in images or simple comparisons. He believed that truth was not a thing one handed to another, but a thing uncovered slowly, like a stone buried in earth. One morning, after the bells had rung and the monks had finished their plain meal of rice and greens, Shen called Liang to follow him. They left the monastery grounds, walking a narrow trail that wound higher into the mountains. The sun was low but bright, and the dew had not yet lifted from the grass. Liang wondered if this was some sort of punishment, though Shen's face gave no clue. The old monk walked steadily, leaning on his staff, his robe sleeves hanging like banners. Liang followed in silence. They walked until the path thinned into rock and clouds drifted close enough to touch. There the abbot stopped. He pointed at the wide sky where clouds rolled like waves. "Look," Shen said softly. It was one of the few times he had spoken directly to Liang in days. The boy lifted his eyes. The clouds moved in slow processions, some heavy and grey, others light and thin. They covered the sun for moments and then broke apart, letting light stream down again. Shen asked, "What do you see?" Liang hesitated, unsure what answer was expected. "Clouds," he said finally. The old monk smiled, not in mockery but in patience. "Clouds come and go," he said, "but the sky remains." They stood together for a long while, saying nothing more. The wind shifted the robes around their legs. The air was sharp and cold. And in that quiet place, Liang felt both small and strangely opened. He did not understand the abbot's meaning, not fully, but the words lingered like the taste of tea on the tongue. Days passed, then weeks, and Liang carried those words with him. Sometimes when he washed bowls or swept the courtyard, he repeated them silently. "Clouds come and go, the sky remains." He thought perhaps it was a lesson about patience, or about endurance, or maybe about ignoring troubles, but none of those felt complete. Meanwhile, his restlessness did not disappear. He wanted clarity, something he could hold firmly. Life in the monastery seemed slow and endless, and he wondered if the world outside might offer the answers he lacked. One evening, after the final prayers, Liang walked again to the outer wall. Below him, in the valley, lights from villages shimmered, and beyond them roads stretched unseen into distance. He imagined travelers walking, merchants carrying goods, families laughing around fires. He felt an ache to be among them, to test himself against the currents of the world, rather than drift in the stillness of the monastery. The sky above was scattered with stars, but soon a band of clouds moved across, covering the light. He whispered to himself, "Clouds come and go, the sky remains." Yet the words did not soothe him. They felt like a riddle with no key. The next morning, Shen sent Liang to the river at the foot of the mountain to fetch water. The monastery had plenty of water from its spring, but the abbot insisted that Liang make the long journey with 2 heavy buckets. It was a task usually given to novices, and Liang felt a mix of annoyance and confusion. Still, he obeyed. The path down wound through trees, across loose stones, and at times the buckets banged against his knees. By the time he reached the river, sweat soaked his back. He bent to fill the buckets, watching the current twist and pull. The river was never still. It shifted, shimmered, and tumbled over rocks. Liang paused, thinking of the sky and clouds. Was the river like clouds, too always changing? He could not decide. Carrying the full buckets back up the mountain was worse. His shoulders ached, his legs trembled, and more than once he spilled water. Halfway up, exhausted, he sat on a stone. Looking up, he saw clouds racing across the sky, blown by unseen winds. They changed shape with every moment, breaking apart, joining again, never still. He thought, perhaps life is like this, always moving, always restless. Then what was the sky? Was it the monastery? Was it peace? Or was it something deeper? When he returned, Shen asked no questions. He simply nodded and let Liang place the buckets aside. That night, lying on his thin mat, Liang's body heavy with fatigue, he thought of the river's restless flow and the sky's quiet endurance. For the first time, he felt a hint of calm. It was not yet understanding, but it was a doorway. Seasons turned. In autumn, the trees on the mountain burned red and gold before shedding their leaves. In winter, snow fell thick, blanketing the monastery roofs and muting every sound. Liang continued his duties, sweeping, cooking, tending the gardens when weather allowed. Yet inside, his thoughts still swirled. He remembered his parents, the illness, the feeling of being abandoned. He remembered the villages below, the imagined lives of ordinary people. He thought of the abbot's words again and again. Sometimes, during meditation, those words would drift into his mind unbidden, and he would sit with them like one sits with a stubborn knot in rope, turning it, loosening it, yet never quite freeing it. One afternoon, during early spring, when the snow had melted and streams trickled down the mountain slopes, Liang accompanied two older monks into the valley to collect herbs. It was rare for him to leave the monastery grounds, and his heart leaped with quiet excitement. The valley was alive with voices of farmers tilling soil, children chasing each other, dogs barking. The monks moved calmly among the people, exchanging respectful nods but saying little. Liang watched with wide eyes. Here life felt full, brimming, chaotic yet vibrant. He longed to step closer, to join in laughter, to taste the bread baking in ovens. But each time he lingered, the older monks urged him along. Their purpose was herbs, not indulgence. As they walked back with bundles of green, Liang turned one last time to gaze at the valley. Clouds gathered above, casting shadows over fields and roofs. The people below continued their work, unfazed. The image struck him deeply, life beneath ever-shifting clouds. He thought again of Shen's words. Perhaps the sky was not the monastery, nor peace alone, but something even larger, something that allowed all of this to exist. Still, understanding eluded him. That night he could not sleep. He rose and went outside, the moon casting pale silver over the stones. He looked up, clouds drifted again, thin like smoke, breaking and reforming. Behind them the vastness of sky stretched without end. Liang whispered once more, "Clouds come and go, the sky remains." For the first time he did not demand meaning from it. He simply let the words be, like breath moving in and out. The days in the monastery followed a rhythm that hardly shifted with the years. Bells rang, footsteps echoed, rice steamed in the kitchen, brooms swept the courtyard. Yet, within that steady rhythm, Liang's mind still surged and ebbed like the restless river. He had begun to accept the words the abbot once gave him as companions rather than puzzles. But the habit of restlessness had not left him. Sometimes he felt a strange hunger in his chest, as if life itself was calling him to witness more than the sound of bells and the folding of robes. His duties were plain, his meals were simple, his evenings were filled with chants that echoed until they almost became meaningless. Still he performed them, because the body can move even when the mind wavers. The abbot Shen noticed without asking. He often noticed before others did, and he never forced his guidance. He would simply place a task or an image in someone's path and let them discover the meaning. For Liang, one morning, the task was to travel down to a distant village at the edge of the valley with supplies. It was a place farther than the boy had yet gone, and the road wound across streams and small cliffs, past farms where oxen pulled heavy ploughs. The abbot gave him only a mule, a pair of baskets filled with dried roots and herbs, and a note for the healer of the village. Liang bowed and set off. He did not ask why the abbot chose him, for he felt perhaps he was being tested. The journey was long, and the sun grew hot as he descended. He passed by children playing beside the road, and they stared at him, wide-eyed at the sight of a monk with shaved head and plain robe. He offered them a smile, and though they laughed and ran off, he felt a warm spark within. As the road bent near the river, he saw fishermen pulling nets, their hands strong and quick. He envied their ease, their laughter rising into the air like song. How simple, he thought, to live by the rhythm of river and catch, without riddles or teachings. Yet even as he thought it, the river flashed in the sunlight, restless and shifting. And again he heard the echo of the abbot's words. Clouds come and go, the sky remains. By the time Liang reached the village, the sun hung low, and dust clung to his robe. The healer, an old woman with eyes sharp as needles, welcomed him. She took the baskets and the note, and she pressed bread into his hands. He thanked her, sat under a tree, and ate. Villagers passed by, glancing at him with curiosity. Some bowed, some simply stared. For the first time in years, he was among ordinary people for more than a moment, and the energy of their lives pressed against him. He heard disputes at the market, saw a young couple laugh, watched a man scold his dog only to pat its head after. The world moved in patterns of joy and grief, woven tightly together. Liang realized how long he had lived apart from it. He slept that night in the healer's shed, the straw beneath him smelling of dry earth. Outside, crickets chirped, and the air was warm. Lying there, Liang thought of leaving the monastery entirely, living as these people did. He wondered if the abbot had sent him here to tempt him or to cure him. Sleep came only when his body grew too weary for more thought. Morning brought the road again, and Liang turned his mule toward the mountain. The path seemed longer on the way back, and his feet ached, but something within him had shifted. The village had opened a new longing, yet also showed him how restless longing could be. He arrived at the monastery by evening, and Shen met him at the gate. The abbot asked only, "You saw?" Liang bowed, unsure how to answer, but Shen nodded as though the silence was enough. Seasons drifted again. Liang grew older, his shoulders broadening, his face sharpening. Yet age did not bring clarity. Instead, He felt himself balanced between two worlds, the stillness of the monastery and the noise of the villages. He wanted both, yet each time he leaned toward one, he felt pulled by the other. It was during this unsettled time that a wandering monk came to the monastery. His robe was torn at the hem, his staff weathered, and his face lined with many roads. He spoke little, slept in the guest hall, and left the next morning. But in those brief hours, Liang saw something, a man who walked the world without being caught by it. The wandering monk carried himself like water, touching many places, yet belonging to none. Liang wondered if that was what the abbot had meant all along, if that was what it looked like when clouds no longer troubled the sky. One night, not long after, storms swept the mountains. Rain hammered the roofs, wind bent the trees, thunder rolled across the valleys. The monks sat in meditation, their chants barely audible over the storm. Liang's thoughts churned like the clouds above. He remembered the storm that had carried away his parents' lives, remembered his fear as a child when the world seemed too vast and cruel. But as lightning split the sky, he also remembered Shen's voice. Clouds come and go, the sky remains. He sat through the storm, trembling yet refusing to move, repeating those words until they steadied him. When dawn came, the sky cleared, bright and wide, and the monastery stood unharmed. Liang stepped outside and breathed the cool air. For the first time, he felt a piece of understanding settle in him, not complete, but enough to feel its truth. The abbot noticed, though again he said nothing. He simply gave Liang more tasks, harder duties, longer hours. He sent him to tend the sick when villagers came seeking help. He made him rise before the others to clean the halls. Liang obeyed, and though his body tired, he felt the work tempering him. Each day he repeated the words quietly to himself, not as a puzzle but as a companion. Clouds come and go, the sky remains. When anger rose in him, he whispered it. When joy filled him, he whispered it. Slowly he began to see how each feeling, no matter how strong, shifted and dissolved like the clouds overhead. One afternoon, Shen called Liang to walk with him once more into the high mountains. They climbed to the same ridge where they had stood years before, and the abbot looked again to the sky. Clouds drifted lazily, casting shadows that moved across the slopes. Shen turned to Liang and asked, "Do you still only see clouds?" Liang hesitated, then bowed his head. "I see the sky too." Shen smiled, and that was all. They stood there until the sun set and the stars pierced the dark. Neither spoke, for the silence said enough. Yet peace is never permanent. Months later, sickness spread again through the villages. Families came begging for help, and the monastery gave what it could: herbs, food, prayers. Liang was sent down with supplies, and he walked from hut to hut, seeing children pale with fever, parents weary from grief. It struck him with painful memory of his own childhood. His heart burned with sorrow, and at times anger rose against the cruelty of life. Why must suffering fall so easily, so randomly? But each time the grief swelled, he whispered the words, "Clouds come and go, the sky remains." Slowly, though his tears still came, he learned not to drown in them. He sat beside a dying man one evening, holding his hand as the breath grew shallow. The man's family wept. Liang whispered the chant of passage, his voice steady. When the final breath left, he felt the weight of sorrow press against him, but he did not collapse under it. Instead, he saw in that moment how even life and death themselves were clouds drifting through the vastness of the sky. The thought frightened him, yet freed him. He walked back to the monastery under the stars, and though grief lingered, it no longer bound him. Years passed. Liang grew into a man with lines of calm around his eyes. He was no longer the restless boy who stared down at the valley dreaming of other lives. He still dreamed sometimes, but he understood now that dreams too were clouds, passing, changing, fading. He tended the gardens, taught the younger novices, and accompanied Shen often into the mountains. Each time they went, Shen would point to the sky without words, and Liang would bow, for the lesson was already alive in him. One winter, when snow lay deep and the monastery seemed carved from silence, Shen fell ill. His breath weakened, his steps slowed, yet his eyes remained clear. Liang sat by his side each night, tending to him as he once had tended to villagers. The abbot smiled faintly and said, "Do not cling, Liang. Even this old body is a cloud." Tears filled Liang's eyes, but he nodded. He repeated the words silently. Clouds come and go, the sky remains. When Shen finally passed, the monastery rang its bells, the sound rolling across the valley. Liang wept openly, yet within his grief there was space. He felt as though Shen had not gone but simply returned to the vast sky that had always held them both. From that day, Liang carried the abbot's staff and walked with steadier steps. He was not abbot yet, for others held that role, but within himself he felt a quiet strength. The boy who had once feared storms, who had once longed for lives he could not reach, now understood a little of what it meant to remain. And though clouds still drifted through his mind's sorrow, joy, longing, he knew at last that the sky within him was wide enough to hold them all. The monastery seemed quieter after Abbot Shen passed. The air still held the same sense of pine smoke and rice. The bells still rang each morning, and the monks still moved with calm steps through the stone courtyards. Yet something subtle had shifted. It was not emptiness, but a space, like the pause after a breath, as though the mountain itself listened differently now. Liang felt the absence more than most. For years, Shen had been a steady presence, not through constant words, but through the way his silence filled a room, through the patient look in his eyes that seemed to see not only what you were, but also what you might become. Now Liang often found himself walking the same paths Shen had walked, carrying the staff the abbot once leaned on, remembering how each lesson had been given, not in explanation but in images. He missed him, but he also understood that even Shen had been a cloud drifting across the vast sky. Still, the longing remained, and Liang accepted it as part of the human way. In the months that followed, Liang took on more responsibility. Younger monks looked to him for guidance, not formally. For another senior monk held the title of abbot now, but quietly, in the way they mirrored his gestures, the way they sought his nod when unsure. Liang did not think himself wise, but he remembered how the old abbot had taught without claiming authority. So he too began to guide without claiming to guide. When novices grew restless, he did not scold. Instead, he gave them tasks that carried their restlessness into effort. When they asked questions about life, he often pointed to the sky rather than give an answer. Some grew frustrated, others thoughtful. In time, many came back with their own understanding. Liang realized then what Shen must have felt watching him grow, how patience is less about waiting and more about trusting the seed that already lies within another. The seasons spun again. Spring brought blossoms on the apricot trees near the gate. Summer filled the nights with insects that hummed until dawn. Autumn turned the mountain red and gold, and winter spread silence with its snow. Through it all, Liang carried the same phrase within him like a lantern. Clouds come and go, the sky remains. It was no longer a puzzle, nor even a comfort, but simply a truth he lived by. When joy came, he received it without clutching. When sorrow returned, he let it pass through him. Even anger, though it sometimes flared when novices quarreled or when villagers spoke harshly, did not root itself deeply anymore. He was not beyond feeling, but he was no longer ruled by feeling. Yet the world beyond the monastery was not still. Rumors reached them of unrest in distant towns, of armies gathering, of hunger spreading where harvests had failed. At first, these were only distant clouds on the horizon, but as months passed, the shadows grew closer. Travelers brought word of villages burned, of families scattered, of roads filled with soldiers. The mountain seemed safe, but Liang knew safety was only an illusion. Even mountains could be climbed, even monasteries could be caught in storms not of their making. One evening, as the monks gathered for prayers, a group of villagers arrived at the gates. Their faces were tired, their clothes torn from hurried travel. They begged for shelter, saying soldiers had taken their homes. The abbot welcomed them, giving food and mats, and the monks opened the storerooms without hesitation. Liang helped settle the families, listening to their stories as children clung to their mothers. He felt again the ache of human suffering, the endless waves of loss that seemed to rise and fall through history. He whispered silently, "Clouds come and go, the sky remains." Yet he knew these words did not erase the hunger in their bellies or the fear in their eyes. Still, he also knew that without that larger sky within, even he would collapse beneath their sorrow. The phrase did not fix the world, but allowed him to keep standing in it. More refugees came in the weeks that followed. The monastery, once a place of silence, grew crowded with voices, with crying infants, with the sound of hammers as makeshift shelters were built. The monks adapted, though food grew thin. Liang found himself carrying heavy sacks, tending fires, even learning to mend sandals for those who had walked far. Some of the villagers grew bitter, asking why monks lived apart from the world when the world burned. Liang did not argue. He simply shared his bowl with them, knowing words would mean less than the act. Slowly, their suspicion eased. But storms grew nearer. One night, the sound of drums echoed faintly up the valley. Soldiers marched below, their torches like a river of fire moving through the darkness. The villagers trembled, and the monks kept watch from the walls. Liang stood among them, remembering Shen's words once more. Clouds come and go, the sky remains. The army passed without climbing toward the monastery, but everyone knew they might return. Fear hung over them like a shadow that refused to lift. The next day, Liang went alone to the ridge where he had once stood with Shen. He watched the sky again, wide and open, clouds drifting without care for the turmoil below. For the first time, he understood more deeply what Shen had meant. The sky did not ignore the clouds, it allowed them. The vastness was not troubled by their passing. Perhaps peace was not found in avoiding storms, but in holding them within something larger. Liang bowed to the empty air, tears in his eyes, feeling the old abbot's presence as surely as if he stood beside him. When he returned, he found the younger monks waiting. They asked what they should do if soldiers came. Liang did not claim authority, but he said simply, "We will remain as the sky remains." They did not fully understand, but his calm gave them calm. Together they continued their work, preparing food, tending gardens, caring for the sick. Life continued, even beneath the shadow of uncertainty. Weeks later, soldiers did return, but not as raiders. A group of weary men climbed the path, seeking medicine and rest. They were not cruel but tired, their armor dented, their eyes hollow. The monks received them without judgment, offering herbs and food. Liang watched as one soldier, younger than himself, broke down in tears while eating, confessing that he had burned villages he never wished to harm. Liang placed a hand on his shoulder and said nothing. He understood that even those who seemed like storms were also clouds, passing through the vastness of life with their own suffering. The soldier left calmer, bowing deeply. In that moment, Liang felt the meaning of the words he had carried for so long come alive, not just within himself, but in another. The sky was not for him alone, it was for all who could glimpse it. As seasons shifted once more, the unrest in the valley slowly eased. The refugees who had come to the monastery began to rebuild homes, some choosing to remain nearby under the mountain's protection. The monastery itself was changed forever. Where once it had been only a place of quiet practice, now it was also a refuge, a shelter woven into the fabric of the valley's lives. Liang saw that clouds had passed, storms had rolled, yet the sky indeed had remained. What had seemed fragile had endured by not resisting, and he too had endured, not because he had answers, but because he carried a truth simple enough to hold through anything. Years later, when his hair showed the first threads of grey, Liang sat under the same apricot tree where he had once eaten the healer's bread. Younger monks gathered around him, asking questions of life, as he once had asked Shen. He did not give long teachings. He pointed to the sky. He gave them tasks. He let them wrestle with their own hearts. Sometimes he told them, "Clouds come and go. The sky remains." Some grew frustrated, others thoughtful, but he knew each would come to their own understanding in time. And when they did, it would not be his teaching, but their own discovery. Liang often walked alone at dusk, watching clouds turn gold, then purple, then vanish into night. He no longer wondered what life might have been in the villages, nor did he long for paths not taken. He saw now that all lives were clouds moving across the same sky, whether monks, farmers, or soldiers. The sky did not choose one over the other, and so he too no longer clung to distinctions. He lived simply, yet within him was a vastness that even storms could not erase. And still, some nights, when wind howled or thunder shook the mountain, Liang would remember the child he once was, afraid and lost, clutching to anything for safety. He would close his eyes, breathe deeply, and whisper to himself the words that had carried him through. Clouds come and go, the sky remains, and with that, he would sit in stillness, steady as the mountain, vast as the open sky above. Time never stopped on the mountain, though at moments it felt as though it did. Seasons rolled in circles, monks came as novices and grew into elders. Villagers rebuilt lives only to lose them again to harvest failures or storms, and always the sky stretched above, silent and unchanged. Liang grew older in the midst of this circle. His body thickened with the strength of labor, then slowly thinned as years passed, but his eyes grew deeper, steadier. The boy who once clung to questions now walked with a calm that seemed to answer without speaking. He did not think himself wise. He simply felt as though the same truth had been whispered to him again and again, until at last he could no longer ignore it. Though he lived quietly, life did not spare him from pain. One summer, a sickness swept the valley again, this time striking children hardest. The monastery became crowded with families seeking medicine, their cries echoing through the once silent courtyards. Liang carried bundles of herbs, boiled roots into bitter tea, sat beside fevered bodies, wiped sweat from brows. He watched children too weak to speak slip away, their parents collapsing beside them. He remembered his own parents' death, the loneliness that had followed. It pressed on him with a weight almost too heavy to bear. Yet each night, when he felt near to breaking, he repeated the phrase that had guided him for decades. Clouds come and go, the sky remains. He let his grief flow through him like rain through the earth, not clinging to it, not denying it, only allowing it. Somehow that allowed him to rise each morning and begin again. His grief did not vanish, but it no longer ruled him. Among the children who survived was a boy named Wei. His parents had both died, and with no family left, he clung to Liang's robe when the time came for the villagers to return home. The boy looked at him with wide, desperate eyes, and Liang saw himself as a child again, left alone in a world that felt too wide. Without hesitation, he took Wei's hand and led him into the monastery. The abbot agreed that the boy would stay. Wei became a novice, though at first he was too young to understand the chants or the discipline. He followed Liang everywhere, copying his movements clumsily, spilling water when he carried buckets, forgetting verses, giggling during meditation. Liang never scolded him. Instead, he guided him gently, as Shen had once guided him. For the first time in his life, Liang felt the bond of father and son, though neither spoke the words. It was a bond deeper than naming. Wei grew quickly, his energy overflowing. Often he grew restless, asking why they lived on the mountain instead of in the valley, why they shaved their heads, why they chanted words that seemed too old to mean anything. Liang smiled each time, hearing his own younger voice in the boy's questions. He answered little, offering instead the same images he had once received. He led Wei up the ridge where clouds brushed the stones, and he pointed at the sky. "Look," he said simply. Wei squinted, frowned, then laughed. "It's just clouds," he said. Liang smiled. "Yes," he whispered. For now, he did not press further. He knew the meaning could not be forced, only lived until it revealed itself. Years turned again. Wei grew taller, his childish laughter softening into the voice of a young man. He learned the chants by heart. His body grew strong from labor, yet still his restlessness remained. At times he slipped down into the valley when his chores were done, mingling with villagers, tasting food richer than monastery rice, watching festivals with fire and drums. He always returned, sometimes guilty, sometimes defiant. Liang did not forbid him. He only asked, "Did you see?" Wei nodded, not always knowing what he was agreeing to. Liang understood. The world called loudly at that age, and sometimes one needed to hear its full voice before understanding the silence of the mountain. One evening Wei sat beside Liang under the apricot tree, his face troubled. "I don't know if I belong here," he admitted. "The world outside feels alive. Here feels empty." Liang looked at him gently. "Clouds come and go," he said. "The sky remains." Wei frowned. "I don't understand." Liang placed a hand on his shoulder. "You will, when the time is ready." The boy sighed, frustrated, but said no more. Liang watched him, remembering how those same words had once frustrated him too. He knew the seed was planted. In time, it would break open. Not long after, the valley faced another storm. This time, not sickness or soldiers, but flood. Heavy rains swelled the river until it broke its banks, sweeping away homes and fields. Families fled upward, many finding their way to the monastery once again. The monks gave all they could, sharing food, spreading mats across the halls. Wei threw himself into the work, running barefoot in the rain to carry supplies, lifting children onto his back when waters rose. His youthful energy seemed endless, but when night came and the halls grew quiet, Liang saw him sit alone, eyes shadowed. He went to him. "What troubles you?" Wei shook his head. "It feels like no matter how much we do, it's never enough. People still suffer. I don't understand why." Liang listened, then spoke softly. "Clouds come and go. The sky remains." Wei looked at him sharply. "That doesn't help them," he said bitterly. Liang nodded. "No, it doesn't. But it helps you not to drown with them, and if you do not drown, you can keep helping." Wei lowered his eyes, silent. The next morning, he rose before dawn and worked harder than before. The floods eventually receded, leaving mud and broken homes behind. The villagers returned, weary but alive. The monastery, though strained, remained standing. Life slowly returned to its rhythm. Wei continued to grow, his questions softening, his energy settling into deeper focus. Liang watched with quiet pride, knowing that the boy who once clung to his robe was becoming his own man. Sometimes he feared losing him to the world, but each time he remembered Shen's voice, reminding him not to cling. Even love, he knew, was a cloud. Beautiful, necessary, but not permanent. The sky remained, even when clouds drifted apart. As years moved on, Liang's body grew older. His hair thinned, his steps slowed, but his spirit grew lighter. He felt as though the storms of his own life had passed, leaving him with a vastness that could not be shaken. He still worked, still taught, still sat in meditation each dawn, but he no longer wrestled with questions. When sorrow came, he welcomed it. When joy arrived, he welcomed that too. He lived simply in the flow of things, as if he had become a part of the mountain itself. Wei, now fully grown, began to guide younger novices. Liang watched him point to the sky just as he once had. He smiled, knowing the seed had sprouted. One evening, as the sun sank and painted the clouds gold, Wei sat beside Liang and said quietly, "I think I understand now. The clouds are feelings, fears, joys, even life itself. The sky is what holds them all, what doesn't pass away." Liang looked at him, tears in his old eyes. He nodded. "Yes, you have seen." Wei bowed deeply, not to Liang but to the truth itself, alive in the sky above them. From that day, Liang felt at peace. He knew the words he had carried his whole life would live on in Wei, and through him in others. The teaching was not his, nor Shen's, nor anyone's. It was simply the truth of the world, waiting to be seen. Clouds come and go, the sky remains. The mountain stood through the years, its stones weathered but unmoved, its pines bending with wind yet always rising again. The monastery clung to its slopes like a bird's nest, fragile yet enduring, worn by storms but still a place of stillness in a restless world. Liang, now old, walked slowly across the courtyards where he had once run as a boy. His back bent slightly, his hair silver where it had not fallen away, his steps shorter, but his eyes still carried that depth which saw beyond clouds. The younger monks bowed as he passed, not out of formality alone but out of quiet respect. To them, he had become what Shen once was, a presence steady as the mountain itself. Liang never thought of himself that way. He simply lived, breathing each moment, watching the clouds drift, trusting the sky to hold them. Wei, now a man with strength in his shoulders and calm in his voice, often walked beside Liang. He had become the kind of monk who others looked to for direction, though he still remembered the child who once tugged at Liang's robe. Together they cared for the monastery, guided novices, welcomed villagers who came with their troubles. The bond between them had shifted from father and son to something like equal companions, though Wei still carried the quiet reverence of a student for his teacher. Liang, in turn, felt gratitude that his years had given him someone to pass the seed to. He had no family by blood, but in Wei he saw a continuation not of himself, but of the truth that had guided him. One winter evening, snow fell so thick it muffled every sound. The monastery seemed carved out of silence, its roofs heavy with white, its lanterns glowing faint in the storm. Liang sat with Wei in the meditation hall. They did not speak, only breathed together, the sound of air moving in and out, the only thread of life in the vast stillness. Liang's body ached from the cold, but his heart felt warm. He thought of Shen, of the day on the ridge when clouds had rolled above them, of the years of longing and restlessness that had brought him here. He thought of the boy who had once wanted to run into the valley, who had once asked why life was so full of grief. That boy felt far away, yet he was still inside him, now held tenderly rather than resisted. "Clouds come and go," he whispered silently. "The sky remains." The next morning Liang woke with a heaviness in his chest. His breath came short, his limbs felt weak. He knew at once that his body was nearing its final days. He did not fear it. Death had walked beside him for years, and he had sat with it many times in others. Now it came for him, as natural as sunset following day. Wei noticed his weakness and tried to help him walk, but Liang waved him off gently. "Do not cling," he said softly. "Even this old body is a cloud." Wei's eyes filled, but he nodded, remembering the same words Shen had once spoken. As days passed, Liang grew weaker. He could no longer climb the paths or sweep the courtyards. Instead, he sat under the apricot tree where he had so often taught, watching clouds drift above. Monks came to sit with him, seeking words, but he gave few. Mostly he pointed to the sky, smiling. When Wei asked if he wished to give a final teaching, Liang shook his head. "The sky is teaching always," he whispered. "No words needed." Still, Wei pressed him gently. "Some will want to remember your voice." Liang closed his eyes, breathing. Finally he said, "Then remember only this. Clouds come and go. The sky remains. Live by it, and you will not lose your way." On his final evening, the sky cleared after days of storm. The stars shone sharp, the air crisp, and silence lay over the mountain. Liang asked to be carried to the ridge one last time. Wei and two others lifted him gently, and together they brought him to the place where he had once stood with Shen as a boy. They set him down on a blanket, and he gazed upward. Clouds drifted faintly across the stars, moving slowly as though unhurried. Liang's lips curved in a faint smile. He whispered, "I see it now, whole." His breath grew shallow, then softer still, until at last it stopped. Wei bowed deeply, tears falling, but he did not cling to grief alone. He felt it pass through him like a cloud, heavy but moving, and behind it he felt the vastness of the sky within himself, steady, unbroken. The monks carried Liang's body back to the monastery, chanting softly. They laid him to rest with simple rites, as was tradition, burning incense, scattering ash to the wind. Wei led the chants, his voice steady even as tears slipped down his cheeks. The mountain held them all, silent, unjudging, vast. In the days that followed, grief spread through the monastery like rain through soil, yet calm followed. The monks continued their tasks. The villagers came and went. Children laughed in the courtyards again. Life moved forward, clouds passing as they always had. Wei often sat beneath the apricot tree, as Liang once had, guiding novices who asked questions too big for their years. He gave them few answers, preferring instead to lead them to the ridge and point to the sky. Some grew frustrated, others thoughtful, but he knew each would find the truth in their own time. When they asked about Liang, he told them he was a cloud who reminded us of the sky, and in saying it, he felt the presence of his teacher still beside him, not gone, only shifted. Years passed. Wei grew into the role Liang had once carried, calm and patient, firm yet gentle. He watched novices grow restless, guided them with tasks, pointed them always to the sky. Sometimes, when storms came and thunder shook the halls, he would close his eyes and whisper the words he had carried since childhood. Clouds come and go, the sky remains. Each time he felt Liang and Shen before him, and countless others who had seen the same truth. The phrase was not only his, it belonged to the world itself, waiting for anyone who would pause long enough to notice. One spring morning, when apricot blossoms drifted on the breeze, a young novice sat beside Wei, frowning. "I don't understand," the boy said. "Why do we keep saying that about clouds? It doesn't make sense." Wei smiled, his face lined with years, his eyes deep with patience. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and pointed upward. The boy squinted at the sky, then shook his head. "It's only clouds." Wei chuckled softly. "Yes," he said, "for now." The boy huffed in frustration, but Wei only smiled. He knew the seed was planted. Someday it would open, and when it did, the boy would no longer need his teacher's voice to explain. The sky itself would explain, as it always had, and so the teaching lived on, not in books or scrolls, not in carved stone, but in the lives of those who carried it, passing it like a flame that never burned out. Clouds come and go, the sky remains. It was simple enough for a child to repeat, yet vast enough to guide a life through storms and grief, through joy and longing, through the endless turning of seasons. Liang's story was only one among many, one cloud among countless clouds. But like all clouds, he pointed to the sky behind him, and in doing so he remained long after his body was gone. The lesson of the story is this: life is filled with change, with joys that swell and sorrows that break us, with fears, with anger, with longing. These are the clouds, always shifting, never lasting. We spend much of our lives chasing them, clinging to them, fearing them. Yet beneath them is something vaster, something steady, the sky of our own true nature, the stillness that is untouched by passing storms. To see this is to be free, not from pain, not from grief, but from being ruled by them. It is to stand as the mountain stands, steady while winds howl, knowing that whatever clouds may come, they too shall pass. And what remains is wide enough to hold it all. Clouds come and go. The sky remains, and so the story comes to a close. The boy who once searched for answers became the monk who carried wisdom in silence, and in time he passed it on to others. Just like clouds that drift, and the sky that holds them all, the teaching remains, waiting for each of us to see it when we are ready. Maybe tonight, as you listen, you felt a little of that truth within yourself. The worries of your day, the thoughts that rise and fall, even the feelings that weigh heavy on your heart, they are all clouds. They move, they change, they pass. But behind them, there is something steady in you, something wide and unbroken, like the sky. That part of you never leaves. As you prepare to drift into sleep, let that thought settle gently inside you. Let go of the clouds for now. Let the sky within you remain. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. If this story helped you find peace, I'd love for you to subscribe to Sleepless Librarian, so together we can share more journeys like this. And when you wake tomorrow, rested and calm, carry this teaching with you. Clouds come and go, the sky remains. Good night, my friend. Sleep well.